A Navy SEAL once asked a base janitor what her rank was as a joke, but minutes later, the entire base would be standing at attention while senior officers saluted her name. The afternoon air at Naval Station Mayport carried the sharp scent of ocean salt mixed with aviation fuel as helicopters circled lazily above the harbor, and the metallic clatter of boots echoed across the concrete parade ground where more than 100 sailors and families had gathered for a recognition ceremony honoring newly qualified SEAL operators. Petty Officer Logan Hayes stood near the front of the crowd with 5 members of his training class, their uniforms crisp, their tridents newly pinned to their chests, the pride of surviving one of the military's most brutal training pipelines still radiating from their confident posture. At 24, Hayes carried himself with the swagger common among young operators who had just earned their place in the Brotherhood. Months of relentless physical punishment and sleepless nights had forged him into someone who believed he had already seen the hardest challenges the Navy could offer. His teammates leaned casually against a railing near the visitor entrance, laughing loudly while families filtered through the registration area, children clutching small American flags and parents scanning the grounds with proud anticipation. Near the entrance walkway, a quiet woman pushed a small cleaning cart between rows of folding chairs, stopping occasionally to wipe down benches or pick up discarded programs that had blown across the pavement in the steady coastal breeze. Her uniform was simple, Navy maintenance coveralls with a modest name tag that read M. Carter, and most people walking past barely noticed her presence as she worked methodically along the edges of the crowd. But Hayes noticed. Maybe it was boredom while waiting for the ceremony to start, or maybe it was the energy of a group of young men feeding off each other's bravado. But when the woman stopped near them to collect a crumpled napkin from the ground, Hayes leaned forward with a grin that his teammates immediately recognized as trouble. "Hey," he called out loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Janitor lady." The woman paused, slowly straightening up from where she had bent beside the bench, her movements calm and unhurried. "Yes, Petty Officer," she replied politely. Hayes tilted his head, smirking as several of his teammates chuckled behind him. "Quick question," he said. "What's your rank?" A few families nearby glanced over, unsure whether the comment was meant as humor or something more cutting. The woman studied Hayes for a moment with steady eyes before answering in a voice so calm it almost seemed detached from the situation. "I don't have a rank," she said. "I just keep the base clean." Hayes laughed, slapping the railing with exaggerated amusement. "Yeah, that's what I figured," he said, looking back at his friends. "I mean, you work around Navy SEALs every day? Thought maybe you'd at least know how the rank structure works." Another SEAL beside him added with a grin. "You probably don't even know what we do out here, huh?" The woman, Maya Carter, simply nodded once, pushing the trash bag deeper into the cart before moving toward the next row of chairs. "I know enough to do my job," she replied quietly. Her voice carried no hint of irritation or embarrassment, which somehow irritated Hayes more than if she had snapped back at him. He leaned forward again, unwilling to let the moment end so easily. "You know," he continued loudly, "people who work on a SEAL base should probably show a little respect. These guys right here." He gestured proudly toward his teammates. "We went through the toughest training in the military to be here." The comment hummed awkwardly in the air as a father standing nearby squeezed his son's shoulder and guided him further down the row to avoid the conversation. Maya Carter continued wiping down the bench without looking up. "I'm sure you worked very hard," she said simply. The lack of reaction caused another ripple of laughter among the young operators, but not everyone nearby found the exchange funny. Standing near the security checkpoint, Master Chief Victor Delgado watched the interaction carefully with the practiced eye of someone who had spent nearly 3 decades in naval special warfare. Delgado had seen thousands of young operators arrive fresh from training, confident, loud, and sometimes reckless with their words, but what caught his attention wasn't Hayes' arrogance. It was the janitor's composure. Maya Carter didn't move like someone who felt intimidated by a group of SEALs. When Hayes leaned toward her desk earlier, she hadn't flinched. When the teasing escalated, her breathing remained steady. And when she turned to move her cart to the next aisle, her posture straightened with a precision that Delgado recognized instantly. Balanced stance, shoulders squared, weight evenly distributed as if ready to react to something at any moment. Civilians didn't stand like that. Delgado stepped slightly closer, pretending to review the registration table while continuing to observe her movements. She navigated through the crowd efficiently, guiding people around chairs and quietly redirecting families toward open seating sections with clear sightlines to the stage. It looked less like janitorial work and more like someone subtly managing crowd flow. Hayes and his friends were still talking behind him, their voices drifting through the warm afternoon air. Seriously though, Hayes continued, shaking his head. Some people just don't understand what it means to be part of something bigger than themselves. The comment drew a few uncomfortable looks from nearby spectators, but Maya Carter didn't respond. She simply finished wiping the last bench and moved her cart toward the walkway that led to the parade ground. As she turned the corner, something small slipped from the edge of her cart and hit the concrete with a faint metallic ring. She quickly bent to retrieve it, but not before Master Chief Delgado caught a brief glimpse of the object resting on the ground. It was a challenge coin. Not the polished souvenir kind sold at the base gift shop, but a worn one with scratched edges and faded engravings. The kind passed quietly between operators after real missions. Maya slipped it back into her pocket and continued down the walkway without another word, leaving Delgado staring after her with a growing sense that something about the quiet janitor at Naval Station Mayport was far more complicated than anyone on that parade ground realized. And before the day was over, the same young SEAL who had mocked her rank would learn just how wrong he had been. The ceremony had barely reached its halfway point when the moment that would change everything began to unfold, and the same janitor Petty Officer Logan Hayes had mocked earlier would suddenly become the most important person on the entire base. The afternoon recognition event at Naval Station Mayport had started exactly as planned. Rows of sailors standing in formation, families seated on folding chairs, and officers taking turns stepping up to the podium to praise the newest generation of SEAL operators. Hayes stood proudly beside his teammates, shoulders back and chin high, occasionally exchanging quiet jokes as they waited for their names to be called. The earlier encounter with the janitor named Maya Carter had already faded into the background of his mind, nothing more than a small moment of teasing between friends. Around the edges of the parade ground, base staff moved through the crowd, keeping things organized while Marines maintained their normal security positions near the gates and perimeter fences. Not far from the seating area, Maya Carter continued pushing her cleaning cart along the outer walkway, picking up stray papers and empty bottles left behind by the growing crowd. To anyone watching casually, she looked exactly like what everyone assumed, a quiet maintenance worker finishing her duties while the ceremony continued. But Master Chief Victor Delgado still hadn't forgotten the glimpse of the worn challenge coin he had seen fall from her pocket earlier. Coins like that weren't handed out lightly in the Navy, and something about the woman's steady posture kept drawing his attention. She moved through the crowd with quiet awareness, her eyes occasionally lifting to scan the surrounding buildings and rooftops before returning to her work. The ceremony continued with applause echoing across the parade ground as another SEAL stepped forward to receive recognition, cameras flashing while families cheered from the bleachers. Then suddenly the peaceful atmosphere shattered. A burst of static crackled loudly from the radios worn by the Marines near the gate, followed by a tense voice repeating an urgent message. Security alert at Gate 2. Possible intrusion attempt. The words spread through the crowd like a ripple of electricity. Officers turned sharply toward the perimeter while Marines began moving quickly toward their assigned positions. Families whispered anxiously, some parents pulling their children closer while trying to understand what was happening. Hayes felt his chest tighten slightly as he watched the sudden shift from ceremony to security response. Situations like this were rare during public events, and the tension was rising quickly. Then, through the growing confusion, a calm voice carried across the open space. All civilians remained seated for the moment. Heads turned in surprise as Maya Carter stepped away from her cleaning cart and moved toward the edge of the stage. Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried with clear authority that immediately cut through the noise of radios and nervous conversations. Security teams establish eyes on the north approach, she continued evenly. Gate personnel confirm visual before initiating lockdown. For a brief moment, several people simply stared at her in confusion. The janitor was giving orders, but something about the command in her voice made the nearby Marines react almost automatically. Turning toward the direction, she indicated, and raising binoculars toward the perimeter road. Master Chief Delgado felt a sudden jolt of recognition. That voice, steady, precise, completely controlled, was the voice of someone who had spent years directing people under pressure. Then the base commander's voice suddenly burst across the radio network, loud enough for several officers standing nearby to hear clearly. "All personnel, listen carefully," Captain Reynolds said. "Chief Carter now has operational command of this situation. Follow her instructions immediately." Hayes felt his stomach drop the instant he heard the words. Chief Carter. The janitor he had joked about minutes earlier wasn't just a maintenance worker after all. Around him, sailors and Marines moved instantly, responding to Maya Carter's commands without hesitation. She stepped onto the stage platform, scanning the perimeter with sharp focus before continuing to issue orders with calm efficiency. Close the east access road. Move Overwatch to rooftop positions. Redirect civilians toward the interior buildings. Radios crackled with confirmations as security teams spread out across the base. What had started as scattered confusion quickly transformed into a coordinated response under her direction. Within minutes, the suspected vehicle approaching the outer gate slowed after seeing the surge of armed security and quickly turned away from the base. The threat disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. But Hayes barely noticed the resolution. He was still staring at the woman on the stage, the same quiet janitor he had laughed at earlier, now calmly directing Marines and officers as if commanding an operation was the most natural thing in the world. And for the first time since earning his SEAL trident, Petty Officer Logan Hayes realized he might have seriously misjudged someone. By the time the security alert ended and the suspected threat had disappeared from the perimeter road, the entire atmosphere at Naval Station Mayport had changed. Families slowly returned to their seats while Marines confirmed the gates were secure, and the ceremony resumed with a quiet tension still hanging in the air. But now every set of eyes on the parade ground kept drifting back toward the woman standing near the stage, the same janitor Petty Officer Logan Hayes had mocked earlier that afternoon. A few minutes later, the base commander, Captain Reynolds, stepped forward to the microphone again, his expression calm but serious. "Before we continue," he said, glancing toward Maya Carter, "there's something everyone here should understand." The crowd grew silent as he motioned for her to step onto the stage beside him. She no longer stood behind a cleaning cart, and the quiet confidence in her posture was impossible to ignore. "Many of you know her as Maya Carter from the maintenance staff," the captain continued, his voice carrying clearly across the parade ground. "But her full title is Chief Petty Officer Maya Carter, retired from Naval Special Warfare." A wave of murmurs spread through the audience as the words sank in. Hayes felt his face grow warm as realization hit him. Captain Reynolds continued, "Chief Carter served multiple classified deployments with some of the most elite units in the Navy before being medically retired. She chose to return here quietly while recovering, working on this base without asking for recognition." The captain paused for a moment before giving a simple command. "All personnel, attention." Boots snapped together across the parade ground. "Render honors." Instantly, more than 200 sailors and Marines raised their hands in salute. Hayes did the same, staring at the woman he had laughed at only an hour earlier. After the ceremony ended, he approached her quietly near the walkway where her cleaning cart still stood. "Chief Carter, I owe you an apology," he admitted. She looked at him for a moment before giving a small, understanding smile. "Did you learn something today, Petty Officer?" she asked. Hayes nodded. "Yes, Chief." She picked up her card handle again as if returning to an ordinary day's work. "Good," she said calmly. "Because the biggest mistake you can make in this line of work is assuming you already know who someone is." Hayes watched her walk away across the base, realizing that the quiet janitor he had mocked wasn't just a maintenance worker at all. She was a warrior whose name every person on that base would remember with respect.